Anybody that says that Christ is not returning is a liar. And anybody that does not believe that there will be mass destruction on the earth and is not telling that to people because that's what's in the book. I don't think that people really care when they read the book. John says if you add or take away from the book, well, there you go. Read it for exactly what's in the book. And I believe, like the rest of the book, what's in there is going to come to pass. I have a couple of questions here that are dealing with the subject of the Antichrist, which I started kind of introducing last week in terms of how we are trying to recognize and build the person or the understanding of the person. So I am probably going to do a bit of review based on all the information in front of me that tells me that there are things that I did not necessarily or adequately communicate or that people misunderstood. So you'll have to indulge me to help and bring those people along for those people that are maybe a little bit off the mark on what they thought they heard me say. All right. It never gets old here. Or boring, for that matter. All right. We have folks tuning in, by the way, this morning from all over the place. There were so many different folks letting me know they're watching throughout the Caribbean. We've got, this is a brand new village or town in Nigeria. Folks calling from the Netherlands, from Holland, and so on. So that's really exciting to see, as well as all the calls from within the United States. Calls, messages. I'm very, very excited and grateful for all that God is doing in people's hearts and minds who are tuned in. So I thank him for that. And I thank those people who take the time, as I said, to write. If it's a question, a comment, I appreciate it. This person here on social media was letting me know that a certain pastor said that the judgment chapters in Revelation is John's version of the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and that Josephus was an eyewitness. And although that may be true, Josephus, I don't think you should include that. That's fraught with its own problems. But if you'd like to believe that, as I said, I'm going to teach what the Bible says. If you'd like to believe that and hold on to that baggage, that's your prerogative. My only problem with this, please do tell me when the earth was burned up, a third part of the earth was burned up. Tell me when the waters turned to blood, and tell me where the heck did I miss the frickin' locust demons? You'll have to excuse me. I don't mean to, I try to keep my tongue in check, but the Bible does say that the tongue is the most unruly member. I just don't have patience. This is my problem. I don't have patience, and there are a lot of pastors out there that should not be called pastors. They are misleading people, as I said, and I do not want to spend my time or my energy on those people. I'd like to spend my time and energy putting out the truth, and if you wish to take it, you do what you want with it. I'm hoping that you take it, you pray, meditate, and think on the things that I say and figure out how you might better apply them in your life, but I am not going to indulge what I call silliness of people's, really, if you think about it, somebody who has the great opportunity and honor to stand before people and teach and put out the Word of God, and they choose to use their time to not be thinking of how misleading what they are prognosticating or what they're saying about, in this particular case, this particular pastor, and there are many like this. It all happened, it's already happened, so that you can sit in a stupor, very relaxed, no need to do anything, because it's all happened. That means you can just peacefully go through life with no expectancy from God for his return or anything else, I'm assuming. So if it all happened in the past, for those people, good, I'm happy. You don't have to live with any anticipation of what is actually kind of taking hold of the globe as we know it. All right, so I did have something else that I was going to do, but I'm going to kind of take pieces of this because, as I said, I said I wasn't going to do review, but we need to do some review. So we started last week investigating the person revealed to us in Scripture as Antichrist. And just as God has many titles in the book, diversity of names revealed to us, Jehovah Shammah, Jehovah Rapha, etc., the Lord of hosts, Antichrist is a copycat. He is a perverter of the truth. He is a pseudo deliverer, a liar that denies Jesus Christ. He also denies the Father and the Son. I mentioned last week, just as there is a Trinity, Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we have the same copycat attempt, if you will. Satan referred to as the father, but with a twist, the father of lies, of course. The dragon, Satan, and the beast, Antichrist, are two parts. The third is the false prophet. So there isn't anything, remember I keep saying this, there isn't anything that is not somehow repeated. Even the pseudo part or the false deliverer concept, it's repeated through Scripture. The son of perdition exposes his character as a degenerate, the man of sin who stands in direct contrast to the sinless one. Another one of his titles is Little Horn, and this is where I realized I lost some people last week. Okay, so the complication or the issue we have here is we've got people who have been through revelation teaching in this ministry, and we have people who've never heard, never been taught. So I have a conundrum, which is I can't go forward until I bring everybody along. So this little horn is out of Daniel's writing. And the best way for me to explain this will be to basically go through the book of Daniel to show you horn in the Scriptures always is power, right? And then Daniel is interpreting things. He either is interpreting dreams or visions. And so what he sees when he saw the horns. Let's go to Daniel 7 so we can read through it a little bit and I can begin at least trying to explain this. Chapter 7 is kind of interesting. You'll have the vision, if you will, and then Daniel must interpret the vision. And I'm going to start kind of just jumping in verse 8. I considered the horns. Remember, he's seeing some type of creature, something very terrible looking, right? He says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So every time you're reading about 10 horns, picture these 10 horns. They could be 10 kings, they could be 10 premiers, they could be 10 world leaders, they could be 10 countries, but the concept is power. And these horns, obviously, multiple horns, multiple powers. But it says, I considered the horns, behold, there came up among them another little horn. So this emphasis on the little horn in the writing of Daniel usually is language alluding to the Antichrist. So there came up another among them, a little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the ancients of days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, the hair of his head was like the pure wool, his throne was like the fiery flame, his wheels as burning fire. And fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, the books were open. So I'm going to actually read through this whole section because there's a lot in it, and then we probably will have to go into this chapter in the next message and peel this apart because there's a lot of meaning. There's a lot of symbolism that actually is applied to things we've already identified and know. So there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So we're dealing with, we've been introduced to the Antichrist, to these world powers, and also the person and the imagery that we're seeing. We'll encounter Christ in these passages too. We'll see a parallel to Revelation where it says war with the saints. The language that will occur in Revelation occurs here in the book of Daniel. Remember that Daniel is receiving, in this case, he's receiving from God how to interpret visions and dreams that he saw. The close of Daniel, I mentioned last week, he sees a scroll, and God says basically that scroll will be sealed up. It's not for Daniel to know. So the mystery that's unfolding in the vision that he's explaining is one thing. What is yet to be revealed, and couldn't be in Daniel's time, is the opening of, in the book of Revelation, of the seals beginning to be opened. So there is continuation. So I said you cannot read this book, specifically if you are trying to do prophetic interpretation and read one book alone by itself, you won't understand anything. So, back to Daniel, and we're in verse 15. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto one of them that stood by me and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. These great beasts which are four kings. So when we have some verse like this, it's an explanation of what previously a verse or two or so we didn't understand. So right here, these great beasts which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. That's pretty straightforward, right? Okay. And please do me a favor when I ask you, if you're sure or you are clear, say yes. Because just a couple of murmuring people makes me think, oh God, we got to go really back to the beginning here. In the beginning. So you have to help me out a little bit, okay? All right. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. What I love about this verse 18 is it tells you we got the victory in the end anyway. And that's in the Old Testament before it's even happened. I like that God said, hey, listen, if you're really paying attention, you're on the winning side, just so you know, okay? All right. Then I would know the truth of the four beasts, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints. Now, if you know your Bible, you know that we could turn the page into Revelation and see in Revelation 13:7, it was given unto him to make war with the saints to overcome them. So, you know, when you start seeing the connection, you realize there's a lot less mystery and crystal ball stuff and the stuff that people do to try and get you freaked out about studying this book, because the Bible does actually confirm itself. So, back to verse 21, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So if you're wondering how it all unfolds and plays out in the end in the book of Revelation, you just read the end before we even covered the beginning. Here, the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus said he, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and it shall tread it down and break it into pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. So we know 10 horns, 10 kings, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time, and times, and the dividing of time. And we'll have to cover this, so if you've not been exposed to this interpretation, when it's times, we're going to be looking at specific dates and numbers, or times and numbers of days. So we're looking at, in this verse, referencing basically the last 7 years, and this portion essentially being at the middle of the week, the 3.5 year point into the last 7 years. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. So in this chapter, you can see self-interpreting horns, kings, or kingdoms. So when we get into reading Revelation, we're going to encounter the same information. It may be phrased differently, but it's the same information as what we just read. The reason why I want to make sure we understand, because it seems there were a lot of people, and probably these are folks that have not been around long enough to have heard previous teaching. The question that I got, well, what is the difference between the horns and the little horn? And the little horn reference, obviously, is the reference to Antichrist. So we have, this is why I said he will be some great politician. He will have some global leadership position to rise to a place where all the world will be listening to someone who's speaking repeatedly here. It says great words, great and swelling words, and then, of course, ultimately great words against God or the Most High. So he comes on the scene as a peacemaker. He's speaking good, great things that all the multitudes will love. They'll say, this is the hour we've been waiting for. Now, if you go and you read through the 7th chapter and then into the 8th, and the 8th chapter in Daniel, it's even narrowing it even more so. Kind of, we started with this image that Daniel's going to interpret, and then he's narrowing it down, and he'll reduce down what he sees, again, a little bit more. So in the interpretation, and I don't want to do it today because I would like to actually show you in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, his dream, what he saw, this giant statue that Daniel interprets. He also is interpreting successive kingdoms that will basically become the dominant world rulers of their day. And that culminates in this 8th chapter with basically he foresees in the future, speaking of a notable or a horn that will be in the future, be after his time, not occurring in his day, speaking and referencing the successive kingdoms, Medo-Persian. We get to the time, of course, I was referencing last week and the week before of Alexander the Great. And it's even within Daniel's vision of interpretation, this 8th chapter, he will actually talk and foresee or foretell of the coming of Alexander the Great, and subsequently that his kingdom basically is split into 4, which are his 4 generals that take whatever conquered territory that he had claimed for himself, split up into 4 parts. That's actually in this 8th chapter. So if we're trying to understand, again, I'm just going to highlight one verse in the 8th chapter when it says in verse 9, and out of them came a 4th little horn. So every time you're reading that, you can be sure that you're reading about what we'll call is the driving force or the person of Antichrist. We'll say, well, how can he be here and be yet in the future? Well, this is, we'll call it something that possesses a person. And I believe that the same spirit that possessed Alexander the Great is the same spirit that possessed many men in history who conquered. And that, if you kind of just take all of that together, it's shocking in and of itself that the Bible can give us this information. But the real reason for showing this today is to try and explain that it is peppered into Daniel in his interpretation. When he's speaking of the little horn, when he's speaking of the self-interpretation, when he says these horns, essentially 10 horns represent 10 kings. So this is the way we would want to start laying a foundation, identifying who this person is, what he's going to do. And why does it matter? Okay, let's go back to this, and I'm going to talk about this in a different way. We as Christians study and call a field of our study demonology or spiritual warfare. Now let me ask you this question. Why do we spend all this time teaching and talking about spiritual warfare? Put on the whole armor of God, and we're not ignorant of the devil's schemes and his methods, if there is not that principle and that power at work today and will continue to be. That same person and power has fueled, I believe, many world leaders who went evil or corrupt. And so when we say, well, Daniel saw what he saw until a time, that's why when I shared with you about this person on social media saying, well, it all happened in the past. Well, here's the thing. If you're reading carefully, you can see that there are things that Daniel predicted that were essentially maybe 200 years into the future from his time. And then there are things that are way in the future. This is prophecy. Prophecy is like mountain ranges. You cannot see the distance between the mountain that looks the closest to you and maybe the one that's behind. There may be a real long valley in between the two hills, and that's kind of why it's important to use all of Scripture and be consistent. You're not going to get to a right interpretation like somebody that says, oh, well, Antichrist doesn't exist. He's already been conquered. Okay, then tell me, if you want to make this book of Daniel historic, what on earth do you do with what John wrote about? It cannot be historic. I could even give you the license to say, like some people have done with the churches, the 7 churches of Asia Minor that are in the book of Revelation. Yes, we can interpret them as historic church ages, but let me just stop right there. Where are those churches located? Okay, there's a reason why those churches are in there. It may be that in God's way of saying this, that area that was the firebrand for Christianity will become essentially the place of ascension, or the place, if you want to call it, of identity with the Antichrist. Usually that's what the devil does. He is a usurper. He does everything just a little bit off, just a little bit blurry. So why would it not be that the very territory that mentions these churches is the very territory that he will most likely come out of? It's Iran, Iraq, or Turkey. You've got that area of Syria. It's not that big of an area. And there's more information for us. If you say, well, how can you make that statement? Hold that thought. So back in Daniel 8. And if you read carefully, in Daniel 8 and, oh boy, all right. Let's go to verse 23. I'll highlight that. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance, understanding dark sentences, shall stand up. Now, here's what's crazy. If you read this whole section, which I don't have time to do, but if you read this whole section, you're going to read that it says, he waxed exceeding great towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land. And those references, the first one towards the south and the second towards the east, they are territories we can identify. So if somebody says, well, I'm still not sure how you're getting to this, you go back in, and when we pick apart this whole chapter, you'll see there are enough clues to tell you where east, south, what direction we're looking at, to tell you that that is the territory we're speaking of. There's no other territory that fits that description. The pleasant land is reference to the Holy Land. We've got a reference, if I'm not mistaken, to the east. One of them is a reference to Egypt. So in the big picture, it kind of gives us the territory in its own unfolding of where Antichrist must come from. All right, so kind of just park that thought because we still have more pieces of information to put together in this puzzle. The other thing that I want to point out, because I just quoted something here, I just read where it says, understanding dark sentences. That phrase, dark sentences, kind of interesting because that expression, dark sentences, is the same language used in Samson's riddles, dark sentences. In other words, he's going to speak things that are perhaps cryptic, and their implied meaning is negative, not positive. Oh, somebody asked me a question. They said, so if Antichrist is the rider on the white horse, and he's going to bring all this crazy stuff on the people, I don't know if I think I brought it out here in one of the messages. Somebody said, if Antichrist, why does he not have an arrow? Well, think of it this way. He comes on the scene as a peacemaker. White horse, peacemaker. Who doesn't love a white horse, right? It's like a yellow school bus. Never mind. All right, so the point here, oh boy. The point here is the use of dark language or dark sayings, however this is said, is basically, we encounter this over and over again. Sheba, when she had hard sayings, they were cryptic sayings that were almost like riddles. And this is essentially what we are going to hear out of the mouth of this man riding on the white horse. And as I said, I believe last week, the reason for that is because I do believe that at the very beginning, his tactics do not require an arrow. Why do you need an arrow when you can kill people with sugar and honey? Doesn't that make sense? Yes. Why do you need an arrow to kill people when you can do it with your mouth? That is the mystery. All right. Antichrist, as I said, will be a brilliant orator. He'll dazzle people with his intellect. He will appear to have a lot of hidden wisdom, and that's why that dark sayings is important. Hidden wisdom. In Revelation 13, we read clearly that the dragon gave him power and his throne and his authority. So don't get too far ahead of yourself and say this person does everything on his own. We also get insight that he is somehow dependent, like God the Father, God the Son, the Holy Spirit. He is somehow dependent in this interconnection of this unholy Trinity. All right, let me move on a little bit. In 2 Thessalonians, let's take a look there. Sometimes I don't have you turn because the time it takes for us to turn, those are kind of precious seconds, but I want you to see where I'm reading from. 2 Thessalonians, 2nd chapter and verse 9, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. So let's just kind of put a little pause right there, because this is a big, big, important part of understanding end times. See, if everybody came to the faith and everybody was of the faith, we wouldn't have a lot of the issues we have right now. A lot of what we're dealing with is what I call the falling away, the backsliding, specifically of this country. And we don't really tend to think of it, but this country, everything that happens here tentacles out into the world. You know, you may not see America that way, but that's the way it is. When we started becoming more secular and more godless, so did the rest of the world. Just look around you, do some world globe trotting on your social media, and you'll see what I'm saying. Well, I'm not blaming America, but everything that happens here trickles out and affects other people. Just think of it like our economy. Our economy's bad, the rest of the world is suffering, except if you live in Ukraine. But anyway, I'm sorry, I just can't help it. Today is the day for me to be feisty, all right? It just happens that way, and it's feisty from the mouth, by the way. All right. So what we are looking at then is someone who is a deceiver. And this is why I keep saying it is very, very important that people of God study this and get real familiar with this. Somebody said, well, what does it matter? It matters much. You know, the Church of Jesus Christ today is asleep. It's completely asleep. I had the misfortune of turning on the TV and kind of going through a couple of channels where there were people talking supposedly about the Bible. And I thought, my God, we're in a sorry state, because the best this person could do was Jesus loves you. Okay, now we're going to pray a prayer, and we need to send you a package, so you need to call this number because they want your address and they want all your information so that they can mail the shillelagh out of you, and maybe you'll send them a dime. But with all that being said, there's TV. I don't know why people don't get this. I mean, I have a program on TV. I thank God that I do. But prince of the power of the air. Hello? Why do you think that we are being influenced, we're being overtaken and overrun by these cultural concepts, which prince of the power of the air? Radio stations. Like we needed Mr. Soros to buy more radio stations. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, but it all lends into this. It's all a push to push everything into the funnel so that everybody can be in this one world mindset. Everybody can be pushed into, whether it's the digital currency, whether it's politics, globalism, whatever it is, it's a funnel pushing everybody into the same hole. All right. That pause was deliberate. All right. Now, good Lord, I'm trying to be serious. What's happening to me? I do want to speak a little bit about this because people are confused. This whole concept of taking the mark, it will not be, for people who understand this, I think you either take the mark or you suffer the consequences. And I really don't think I need to elaborate, because if you don't take the mark, you will not be able to feed yourself, buy or sell anything at all, which means if cars still are being made and exist and function, or food, gasoline, your most essential things, forget about it. Now, we talk about this and we almost talk about it in a caricatured way. But imagine not being able to buy food or get water or anything that you need to survive. And that is the future. That's not, oh, that's like very futuristic, like we used to think flying cars were futuristic. Well, guess what? They already have flying cars. I hope they don't implement them, because we have a hard enough time with people on the road, let alone in the sky. Then you've got planes falling apart too. So yeah, let's not add to that. But my point is that we're already there. We've already set one foot in motion by basically doing away, or the contemplation of doing away with fiat currency, which basically, if we go on this pattern, we're back into the funnel. Everybody must merge into it. So it's important for many reasons, not just, okay, we're studying the Bible. And this is what I think most people don't get. I am not teaching on this because it's something tantalizing and it's something that's, oh, this is very different from the rest of the book. This should be something that people read and understand is absolutely going to happen in the future. And no one knows exactly when that will. Like I said, there are signposts to say these things must happen. We will look at some of the things that Christ has spoken of, other places where we have indicators of what must happen for that day to be ushered in. But anybody who says that day will not be ushered in is a liar. Anybody that says that Christ is not returning is a liar. And anybody that does not believe that there will be mass destruction on the earth and is not telling that to people because that's what's in the book. I don't think that people really care when they read the book. John says if you add or take away from the book, well, there you go. Read it for exactly what's in the book. And I believe, like the rest of the book, what's in there is going to come to pass. So with that being said, we have to look at something. We have a whole concept of globalism, and the question that's on the table is, who are these 10 kings or these 10 kingdoms, and how will this all play out? Well, again, now I'm going to give you opinion, and I always state that when it's opinion. Everything else, if I don't qualify it or quantify it, it's Bible. This is opinion. It makes perfect sense right now if you look at the global state of things, for there to emerge basically. Somebody was just sharing with me, I believe it's in Holland. Holland is actually, there's some mergers going on with Russia right now. Most countries will be affiliated with one of 3 countries. They're either going to be affiliated with China, they're going to be affiliated with Russia, or they're going to be affiliated with America. But we are diminishing, our power is diminishing. Our world presence is diminishing. But there will be associations made. So if we look at the whole global community in what right now, let's just say even the European Union, or we'll call it federations, there must be countries that either fall away, drop out, disappear, or merge with other countries to become the part of this, we'll call it 10-toed confederacy. And when that occurs, it has not yet occurred, but the makings of it, all we'll call it the footwork, the preparation, that's already in place. That's already there. We just cannot see what the 10 are. Does it matter if the 10 belong to the European Union, or they're 10 European countries, or they're 10 world power countries with nuclear power? Some have suggested these 10 countries be of Muslim connection. I don't believe that. I don't think that that has any yay or nay, because those people have weapons and they don't care whatever you are. They just care about, if they can press the button one day, that's what they care about. I don't think that they are part of the equation. They will fuel in and help usher in that time. But it still will revolve around 10 nations and this little horn that must come from some, we'll call it confederacy. So when people talk about this, I think it's imperative to not just discount this and say, well, it doesn't matter. Now, I hate to do this, but if you want to turn, I'm going to take you back to Daniel again, because there's things in there I'd like to point out. In Daniel 7, and all the pages are turning. Okay, in Daniel 7, so I'll go back there again. It says, a little horn will rise up out of part of the territory which would be part of that old Roman Empire. If you have an opportunity, if not, don't worry, I'll bring it next week. I have a map which shows you the extent of the Roman Empire at its apex. And that's what we kind of need to look at, that territory. Not in antiquity, in the future, but we'll look at a map of the Roman Empire from the past to kind of get an idea of this. In Daniel 8, we read that the Antichrist, of course, will rise out of that, what is called that former territory, that also belonged to the Grecian Empire. So you're going to see a lot of repetition inside the book of Daniel itself. And as I was mentioning earlier, when I was talking about east and south, if you're using these and you're looking at a map, it all lines up and becomes visible. It's not something you have to imagine. So I'll bring in a map next week, and we can look at that together, and hopefully I can move on from here with enough of this information being clarified. The other thing I would like to just point out and remind you all as we go into this is there's a reason why the book of Genesis records kind of the first event of man doing what's right in his own eyes outside of the garden is the Tower of Babel. Again, where is that territory? There's no accident that all of this seems to be in that general area. So we almost have to get it in our heads that that territory is just as important for the Antichrist as Jerusalem is for the return of Christ. And once we get that clear, it's almost like, okay, these are the two things that are absolutes. One more thing I want to talk about from Daniel, and then I think I will be ready to move on. There's a reference in here that I read to you where it says that he subdues 3 kings. Again, slight, we'll call it implications that you can read between the lines. That's why I said he will have great military understanding, whether that means that he uses force eventually or he just has great skill to negotiate. This is what that means. If you think about it, I think there's a lot in the term deceit or usurper or pseudo to apply to him. Once that becomes clear, again, we're on the right path. He will become so strong and so powerful that kingdoms will surrender to him. Now, I'm going to ask you something. Who on the stage of history have countries, if we want to call them, or kingdoms, surrendered to, entire kingdoms surrendered to? Well, there's a lot in antiquity. In our more modern history, there have been people who have invaded and overtaken territories. No-brainer, somebody like an Adolf Hitler, right? But again, the spirit of Antichrist could have been that person, but the whole way, the whole 9 yards, just the spirit of Antichrist working and operating in that person. So when you read in Revelation 17 where it says he becomes so strong that he basically gets kingdoms to surrender, it will not be like we've seen in our history. This will be something of a completely different nature. And whether that is, I have all the nuclear buttons in my hand and I'm ready to punch at any minute, so you will succumb, or whether that's, hey, brother, nice to see you, I love you, right? I don't know. No one can know that. But that's what we're looking at. Now, just remember something. Christ is described by John. The hippies love this. God is love, right? So you don't think that the pseudo usurper deliverer is going to come on the scene as loving everybody. These are the things I'm just wanting people to really kind of let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there be a falling away first. And whatever that means, that falling away, whether that falling away is the apostate church, or I can only really put that as the apostate church, the falling away, and then the man of sin should be revealed, the son of perdition. So if you think about this and put it all in perspective, it's like God saying, there is a time. That time has not yet occurred, and that's why John says, but the spirit of Antichrist, and Paul even says, the spirit of Antichrist is already at work, but Antichrist himself, not yet. Is the devil still at work? Absolutely. And this is the other thing. If everything has already happened, for those people that preach it's all historic, then you tell me how it is that, and I read all the messages that come in on our phone lines, through our social media, of people saying, the devil has been on my case. And they'll itemize what it is that, do you mean to tell me that that's a Christian who just had bad luck? Let me say that again. You mean that person just had bad luck? But on a multiple scale level, how many people do I read the same thing? Which is, I just started listening to you, I'm very interested, and now a pipe in my house is broken. So I was going to give money, but I'm preoccupied right now. And when I finish taking care of the pipe that broke in my house, and I might have some money and I might have some time, I might listen to you. It's kind of like that. The devil makes a way. So anybody who says, oh, this has already happened, is also saying, oh, and the devil's been dealt with. We don't have that problem anymore. Okay, I'm happy for you. But the way I see it, most people who call themselves Christians and are walking with Christ are being buffeted, if not on a daily basis, at least on a regular basis. That is called spiritual warfare. That's why when Paul wrote Ephesians 6, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. This is the thing. Was he insane? Was Paul insane? Well, then I have to ask, if somebody says the devil's been done away with and he doesn't have any power, I must assume then that either I'm insane or the person that's saying that is insane, or you're all insane. Pick one. Never mind. Okay, so last but not least, we are told that as we follow this procession that we start looking at in Revelation with the horses and riders, there is this procession, if you want to call it that, this initial bloodless attack, that's a good way to put it, which will turn eventually, but the rider on the white horse with no arrow, that turns into war, that turns into death, that turns into famine. All of that is yet to come. Just look what you have to look forward to. And Revelation 13 also says something very interesting. It says that the fate of Antichrist. Let's go there, Revelation 13. If you want to turn there. And if you start reading, it's discussing the two beasts. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. There it is again. And upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. We can keep going, and I can keep giving you the greater detail, but I prefer to save this to when we go back and do Daniel in greater detail. But the references here are exactly the same as the references in Daniel, referring to Alexander the Great, to the Medo-Persian Empire. They're all the same entities, if you will. But like unto a leopard, his feet were as the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. Remember I said pseudo deliverer, deceiver, right? Faker. Well, who would have the audacity to come on the stage of history, die, and resurrect, and copy what Christ did? Now, I'm saying Christ didn't die by the sword, but the implication is there is nothing that he does that's original. It's all been previously done. Everything is a copy in the negative. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? They worship the beast. That means there will be people on earth as goofy as the people today, who are going to be, listen, who is like him? Who is able to make war with him? There'll probably be people, gosh, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but there'll probably be people, some with blue hair and purple hair, worshiping at this creature's feet. Yeah, you're the best. This is amazing. Give us more. We want more handouts. And and the beast which was wounded by the sword and did live, kind of interesting. And that's why I said to you, when people are not paying attention, and they say, oh, well, when JFK was shot in the head, they all thought that event, that he would resuscitate, that he'd revive, right? Not reading carefully. It says very, very carefully here, by the sword. And you might say, well, but who uses swords in today's society, right? We have guns. We live in a modern society. Well, again, John writing in his day, but I do believe, there was no gunpowder in John's day. So could it be that that's the interpretation? It could be that this person is wounded by many means, but I tend to lean towards the literal here. That tells me possibly we will be living at a time when people do not possess weapons, firearm weapons. Now, we talk about this all the time when people say, well, in this country, we still have the right to bear arms. But this book wasn't written strictly for America. So you go outside this country and you'll find lots of countries where they've already taken away and the citizens have given up their guns. Somebody said to me, well, it's so good, a country like, and they named the country, that they don't have weapons. They don't have guns. Their police don't even have guns. Are you kidding me? Talk about, okay, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say it. Talk about if you can't see that the bad people are always going to have a way to get, but you would take away from the people who are trying to protect the citizens. That's how easy that could happen, to where if we're reading this properly, and you can see there is this tug of war right now. Over the last maybe 5 years, this has been going on, and more so. And I say 5 years because there have been pushes throughout maybe the last 30 or 40 years, strong pushes against the National Rifle Association, other entities that do promote guns. But there's been this drive to prohibit the citizens under the guise. If you're a person that's into firearms, you'll see that specifically in the state of California, there are more firearms that have been banned and outlawed, and you're not allowed to have this. You could go and buy a gun, but you may have actually, if you're not going to a known vendor, you may be buying something that's illegal to possess in the state of California. No one's going to tell you that until you get arrested. So That's the drive. Take away the firearms. So is it plausible, and is it possible even, that Antichrist would be wounded, mortally, fatally wounded with a sword? Yes, absolutely. That's the type of thinking when we're looking at what may happen in the future in a world where we have lawlessness, where we have no means to protect ourselves, and we're basically thrown back into a time where, yes, you can carry a knife or a club, that's all you can have. That's a very good likelihood. So don't just think because John wrote in a day when they didn't have firearms that that might be interpreted as something else. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. It's important. All right. So in this last little kind of scene we're doing here, I just finished telling you about his wound, and then he comes back to life. So even in death, which is not really, I don't believe he has a real resurrection, but even in death, he will be able to deceive people. Now you tell me, if somebody wasn't studying and learning about this person and his ability, his great ability as an orator, his great ability as a military or even as a diplomatic negotiator, and you're not well versed in all of this, and somebody comes on the scene in history, future, and starts saying, we need peace, and we need love, and we need everybody to come together, you start hearing that person telling about how, we've gone a little bit off the track. We all need to band together now and start talking about love, kindness. It sounds great because we as Christians, we identify with that from this book. But if you don't know who you're listening to, you will say, this is he who we were or heard or were waiting, or those Christians spoke of. My answer to those people is that's why you study this book. You don't study this book so that you can club it over people. You're studying for yourself to get to know the dangers and the threats ahead of you. Well, then the last question is, and again, people ask questions, and there are no bad questions, only the ones you don't ask. Somebody said, well, do you think we'll be alive? I can't speak to that because I don't know how long. I know many events that are in this book that must unfold. That I can, and I will share with you the things that I see as world events that must come to pass from the Bible. But beyond that, I can't tell you how fast those events will unfold. Will they unfold in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years? I don't know. And only when we study those, we'll call them signposts, will we begin to be able to, at that time, at the coming and the surfacing of this person, will we be able to know by the series of events that must come to pass. So with that being said, I'm hoping that I cleared up for those who maybe didn't understand what I was talking about last week in the little horns. We will have to go into Daniel because I realize that for people who do not have the teaching and the repetition, you're like, horn? I don't know what that means. I mean, you know what a horn is, but you didn't know what the application was, and I'm hoping now you do. My advice to those people who tend to get overwhelmed with this book is just calm down and stop. Don't go into this mindset, because I've read enough messages from people who listen saying, well, I'm a little bit nervous and I don't understand this and I don't have this and I don't. Just stop. How did you start in the first place? You started by listening and taking small steps, and that's what we're going to do with this book. I am determined, because of all the bad information that I see. It's prophecy, so it's not like interpreting a psalm or something else, but I can line up enough to show you what is there and what has not yet happened. When people say, well, how do you know? Look, go and read from the starting point of, I just say the whole book of Revelation. And if you want to do the shortcut, start at about the 4th or 5th chapter, after he looks up and he sees in heaven a door open. From that all the way to the end of the book, is basically the unfolding of the last period on earth. There is no solution for God other than he must correct. Remember back there in the beginning, the earth was cursed, some animals in the creation, people. That curse needs to be removed. And that curse, once removed, God says, then he will recreate and bring down basically what will be our new earth, new heaven, new earth. Until that time, everything from the book of Genesis until that time, God will have to enter in and basically heal everything that has been soiled by sin. And that's not just we as human beings, that's everything in the world around us. The corruption of our sinfulness goes all the way as deep as you want into the sea, into the atmosphere. And don't think that we just created all this. It's just, this is not climate issues. This is just what man has done with his ingenuity. And some of it has been great and made great contributions, and some of it has been very evil and hurt the world. So God has to come in and basically bring us back essentially to the place where Adam and Eve were in the garden before the fall. That is basically the history of the first family is the future for the believer, where we live with him eternally. And there is no death, and there is no pain, and there is no dying. But for that to happen, the end must come. And that end, for some people, is totally scary. But if you know what you're reading, and you know God multiple times, both in Daniel, in Ezekiel, in Isaiah, and in Revelation, he again and again says, the saints will be victorious. The saints will have the victory. They will overcome. Revelation, to him that overcomes. That tells me that God said, I built in a plan for you to make it through, overcome, and have the victory. Now, the only question is, will you faith your way through, or will you be the fearful person who says, I can't take God at his word, I don't understand any of this, or I walk by faith. My eyes lie, but my faith does not. I'm going to follow him who went before me, who knows the way, I do not. Those are your choices. So I'm hoping that people will understand how important learning this book really is. It's not an exercise in tantalizing. It's an exercise in correcting the massive amount of misinformation that's been put out by people who didn't care enough to tell you, and the hundreds of books which I will show you that didn't care enough to say, this is the reality. This is not a fantasy. Somebody says, well, if you add up the numbers of this person's name, if you add up the letters of that, you really think God needs to do that? Do you really think that God needs to embed, yes, are there codes in the Bible? I do believe that God, in his language, in his infinite wisdom, in his ways, there are things we probably don't know, but would God go so far as to say, and I'm going to make this so crazy that I'm going to make it a puzzle, and I'm going to take all the pieces, I'm going to remove about 5 of them, and I'm going to shake them up, and I'm going to give them to you and say, here's your roadmap. That's not the God we serve. So we need to bring some order, some sense. And really, I hate to do this because a lot of people want to make this so super spiritual, but we actually need to bring our analytical mind into this book and stay with what is there and not go into this great craziness that I've seen almost everybody who touches this book do. So I pray you'll be along for the journey. I hope I've cleared up this problem with the horns, because next week I do not do review, hopefully. All right? That's my message. You've been watching me, Pastor Melissa Scott, live from Glendale, California at Faith Center. If you would like to attend the service with us Sunday morning at 11 a.m., simply call 1-800-338-3030 to receive your pass. If you'd like more teaching and you'd like to go straight to our website, the address is www.pastormelissascott.com.